4,000 to flee their homes in recent days, and some 650,000 civilians are without access to aid. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights has warned that the escalation of fighting in South Sudan has resulted in alarming gross violation of international human rights and humanitarian law. The country was plunged into conflict 18 months ago between forces loyal to President Salva Kiir and rebels allied with his former deputy, Riek Machar. Talks to end more than a year of bloodshed in the country broke off without a deal in March this year.
For more than 17 months now, women, men and children have been suffering from the effects of this man-made catastrophe. People have lost their homes. More than 2 million people have had to flee from their homes. They've lost their property. They've lost, in many cases, family members to death or to forced recruitment. And we're receiving very worrying reports in the last month of an escalation in the conflict, with homes and villages having been entirely burned, property having been looted, rapes and killings by government forces and the opposition.
Doctors Without Borders say over 11,000 newly displaced people have arrived at the UN base in Bentiu in the last few weeks with horrific accounts of violence. South Sudan is the International Committee of the Red Cross' second biggest operation in the world after Syria, with a budget of $140 million US. Analysts have warned that it could be the largest by mid-June, when it will appeal for additional funds.
All right, so let's have that conversation now with Edmund Jakani. Edmund, thank you very much for being with us here on the program. Gosh, I was looking at the visuals and and saying to you that, you know, I can't believe that people are living like that. I mean, this is such terrible conditions. You telling me it has gone worse than that.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. If you see the actual current situation in South Sudan has gone worse than that. And specifically after the collapse of the attempt for reaching peace agreement on the 3rd of May, it immediately went completely to square, which is very bad. As I'm speaking now, I'm quite sure the figures that we have now have increased or doubled. When we talk about the number of people who are displaced, it might have increased.
Yeah.
The humanitarian situation might have worsened worse than what we have seen right now.
Yeah.
And of course, so if new assessments to be done, instead of being a second operation zone for International Crisis Committee, by now might have been somehow equal to Syria. This is really worst.
Wow. Let's look at this report and some of the key findings that have come out of it. What are those that really stand out for you?
This report specifically, we are trying to add a dollar figure to the current war in South Sudan. And the dollar figure that we have added, the report come out with finding which predicted that if the war continues from now for for the next 5 years, we will lose 22 to 28 billion US dollars. That we will lose that amount of money. And the region, that means, the IGAD region, that means South Sudan with its neighbors, which mainly is Uganda, Tanzania, Sudan, Ethiopia, may lose about 53 billion US dollars if the war continues. Yeah. But if the war stops today, we will save that amount of money. And that means a lot.
Yeah.
And right now, South Sudan's source of revenue is only the oil. Almost South Sudan is depending 80% on the oil. And as we're speaking, the war is really concentrating in the oil-producing states. So the production of oil is completely zero right now. That means we are not having any source of revenue. Yeah. And besides that, South Sudan is a country where 60% of the national budget is being spent on security. So you can imagine that 60% is spent on security. That has implication on social services. So as we're speaking right now, the official dollar rate versus South Sudanese currency, which is South Sudanese pounds, in the central bank is 2.9.
Yeah.
In the commercial banks, it's 3.1. But if you can call it as a parallel market or black market, it's 9.0.
Wow.
So check the difference between 9 and 2, check the difference between 9 and 6. And the dollar rate exchange rate, which is 9.0, is the determining factor for price of services in the market. Yeah. So right now, everything is really worst. Economic situation is worst. Prices have increased. The inflation rate is very high. As I'm speaking right now, currently, you find that South Sudanese who have their children studying in the neighboring countries, which is mainly Uganda and Kenya, are repatriating back their kids from Uganda and Kenya back to South Sudan to Juba because they can't really afford the dollar to pay the school fees of the kids. And as the kids are coming back to South Sudan, there's no payment of teacher salary. So teachers who are really qualified teachers are leaving public schools and going to private schools. Yeah. And the private schools, because of the cost of living, is increasing school fees. So you can see the implications is really huge.
Yeah. You know, we look at all of these findings and research that's done into it, but what's going to be done about this? I mean, you've conducted all of these surveys, it's there. The reality is the war has to stop now and the economy has to start again, because at the moment what you're saying is it's at a dead standstill.
Yes, yeah.
So what happens with something like this? Who has seen it? Who can do something about it?
Well, that's why we are here in South Africa, in the sense that South Africa is going to host the African Summit. And we're coming here to advocate, to really bring to South African government and South African citizens and South African companies that are investing in South Sudan that if this war continues, we are going to lose. South Sudan may look far in terms of distance from South Africa, but in terms of economics, it's closed. And secondly, I would like to just talk something about South African role in South Sudan. As you know, South Africans have a lot of role to play in South Sudan. South Africa right now is mediating the inter-party dialogue within the SPLM factions that has created this war. Same time, South Africa is involved in the AU High Implementation Panel under the leadership of Thabo Mbeki, the former president, which is sorting out South Sudan and Sudan post-independence arrangement. Yeah. At the same time, you have South Africa has been seconded, one of the AU states, to add support to IGAD, which mediate the South Sudan peace process. At the same time also, we have Madam Zuma, who's in the African Commission, and we have the African Commission of Inquiry, which have investigated atrocities in South Sudan. So we feel it's better to bring to the attention of South African government and South African citizens and South African companies that as AU summit is going to be held here, it's better for South African government to push. First is stoppage of the war. Yeah. We need to see the guns have been silent. Then we can see the political process, because political negotiation sometimes takes time. But as the war continues, we will be losing. And that's why we're really here for advocacy and for launching the report in South Africa and Joburg here to make sure that at least South African government can play a positive role to ensure that if the summit can come with very concrete resolution that players let the two warring parties stop the war, so that at least we can reduce the humanitarian disaster.
So in reality, it's a call for the South African government to get involved and to assist where they can, and business as well. Let's create, we've spoken about the financial implications of what's happening in South Sudan. Let's talk about the humanitarian crisis. You spoke briefly about the amount of people that have fled South Sudan and gone to neighboring countries to try to get an education, to try and find work. But what are we looking at? I mean, what are the numbers looking like? And how many people have actually been killed in the war?
In the war, there's no particular proper statistics that were being assessed. Besides, we have UN mission in South Sudan, which could have really provided us with accurate figures. But the figures are between 8,000 to 10,000. Yeah. That people who have been killed. And then right now, we are talking about some reports which are coming recently, that we are talking about 1.2 million people who are going to be challenged with humanitarian situation, sort of like they're going to starve, hunger is going to come, because the war has affected the humanitarian situation in South Sudan in such a way that South Sudan is divided into two equally. The northern part, where the war is been concentrating, is really, it's a bit somehow semi-desert, and it is pastoralist. So farming in that particular part of South Sudan is not huge. The southern part of South Sudan is really farmers, and this is where real farming is happening. But right now there's a whole displacement from northern part to the southern part, and that has affected the agriculture production in the southern part. And that means completely there's not going to be any production. The production rate is going to be increased in terms of agriculture. So we're going to depend all on humanitarian. As I'm speaking right now, communities which are hosting internal displaced persons, because of these high rates of the figures, the inflation rate against the South Sudanese pounds, are thinking voluntary reporting to the IDPs camps. Why? Because they can get a meal there free, they can get a shop free, they can get medical services free. So imagine that somebody who has not been affected by the war is thinking voluntary to report to internal displaced persons camp because of services and because of the economical impact that have raised the prices. And that's the humanitarian situation that we're in.
Yeah. Just finally, have you made inroads into having some meetings with our government to try and assist during your travels here?
We are meeting today, specifically with the Office of the Vice President, which is much more engaged in facilitating the inter-party dialogue between the warring parties or the factions of the SPLM. But we have some few meetings that we have here with some few South Africans that we know they're influential, they can push things to ensure that at least draw the attention of the government.
Good. Well, we wish you the best of luck.
Thank you.
I do hope that it turns out fruitful and that something comes of this. The devastating situation that's in South Sudan at the moment, talking to us about it, Edmund Yakani, Executive Director of the Community Empowerment for Progress organization, who's here in South Africa looking for all the help and assistance that he can. Thank you again and good luck.
Thank you.
All right, let's take a break. We'll see you after this.